When your president's dinner guest list includes foreign billionaires, meme coin backers, and sanctioned suspects, you don't just have a scandal, you have a national security emergency disguised as dinner.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. Before I ask my questions, I just ask that after this hearing, you go back and reconsider a claim that you made in your opening statement. It would certainly shock Americans to hear that only 12% of our foreign aid reaches recipients, needy recipients on the ground, the people who need the help. That is not actually an accurate number. That is the amount of our aid that goes directly to local groups on the ground. But as you know, most of our aid runs through bigger international organizations like Save the Children. Those entities are getting somewhere around 80–85% of the aid we give them directly to recipients on the ground. And so I think what you've done to shutter USAID is illegal, but I also think it's bad policy. And I do think it's important for us to all be operating with the same set of facts. And the fact is not that only 12% of taxpayer dollars are ending up in the hands of the people who really need it on the ground. Mr. Secretary, I wanted to talk to you about the president's personal business interests. During his first term, he made the decision to not enter into any new business deals during his presidency, that Trump-affiliated businesses would not enter into any foreign business arrangements. And that made sense because obviously it can be confusing for foreign governments to know how to try to win favor with the U.S. government if they have one route, making concessions that are good for U.S. national security, and they also have another route, which is perhaps helping the president's business interests. The president obviously changed that policy, and in this administration, his business interests are announcing new agreements and new investments into those business interests by foreign governments. And I think it stands to reason that creates a real problem for foreign policy, and it creates a problem for foreign governments in which they don't exactly know what the best way is to try to get on good terms with the U.S. government and with the White House. Is it to do what's right for American national security, or might it also be to do a business deal with the President of the United States or the entities that he controls? Just to clarify, when the President's businesses are engaged in negotiations, for instance, with the UAE on their stablecoin business, there was this big investment announced recently. You are not part of those negotiations. Those are being done by the president's family or those representing the president's business.
Yeah, I'm not aware the president's involved in managing any business. He's other than the presidency of the United States. His family is allowed to make business deals. They continue to operate the enterprises that his family ran. I also don't accept the notion that these deals, for example, in Saudi Arabia or the UAE or Qatar, had anything to do with the president. For example, the Qatar bought $200 billion worth of airplanes from Boeing. The president's not as far as I know, not a shareholder, certainly doesn't own Boeing. So the overwhelming, if you look at the deals that were structured, they were involved in investments in the United States. That's the deals he signed, and or investments in, for example, the UAE or Saudi Arabia involving artificial intelligence.
UAE did announce a massive investment in World Liberty Financial, and World Liberty Financial is controlled by the president. And the president does actively engage in these businesses. He uses his social media to market the businesses that are being run by his family. I mean, just go on to his social media feed and you will see him marketing his meme coins. So that is the president of the United States. That is not his son's doing.
But that, just to be clear, that was not part of this. That was not an announcement as part of this trade visit that was conducted into the Middle East.
Well,
whether
or not it was made during the time the president was there are obviously business deals being done between Trump entities and these countries. Let me ask you about the one that is probably most confusing to this committee, which is the planned gift of a plane to either the United States government or the president. Is it your understanding that this luxury plane that Qatar has offered the president, and the president has announced he is willing to accept, is a gift to the United States government, or is it a gift ultimately to the president himself that he can use in his library?
Well, you'd have to talk to the Department of Defense, because this is a replacement, or at least a temporary bridge plane for Air Force One, the new Air Force One, which is way off its delivery schedule. And so that would have to be with the Air Force. They operate Air Force One. My understanding of it basically has been from the very beginning that this is a plane that was identified after talking to Boeing about what other planes around the world would fit the bill that are out there that could be used now. They identified the ones the Qataris had as an opportunity for one, and as a result, or the UAE had that as opportunity for one, and that's how that deal was.
And it's not your understanding that the plane ultimately will belong to the president or to the president's library after.
Well, I'm not involved at that level of it. I've never heard that before. What I've heard is that plane will replace Air Force One, which is an Air Force plane.
Let me ask you about the dinner that's happening this Thursday night. The president has offered access to him to the 200 top purchasers of his meme coin. Reports are that maybe about half or more of those individuals who will be meeting with him, many in a VIP reception, are foreigners. Do you have a list of those foreign individuals who will be meeting with the president?
I don't. I don't know anything about. I didn't even know there was a dinner on Thursday night, so I'm not sure what you're referring to.
So you don't know whether any of the foreign individuals who are going to be meeting with the president this Thursday night, for instance, are on our list of sanctioned individuals, or whether any of those individuals have connections to, let's say, terrorist organizations abroad?
Well, I think if they had terrorist links, the Department of Homeland Security probably would not have allowed them into the country. But again, I don't even know there is a dinner on Thursday. You're asking me about something I don't know about.
Well, but listen, this is a dinner that the president is having. It is likely going to involve some very significant foreign interests. You have to be pretty wealthy in order to be able to get inside this dinner. Isn't that a relevant question for the Secretary of State?
Yeah, I'm not the social
Which foreign
secretary,
interests are going to be speaking to the president? I mean, it's kind of naive to believe that they aren't going to be in that room talking about national security matters.
Well, I don't think that that's the case at all, because I would be aware if it was the case. The truth of the matter is I interact with government officials and others in governments of other countries. That's what I don't say. You're asking me about a dinner I don't know anything about. I can't answer you because I don't know anything about this dinner. It's the first I heard of it. Like I said, I don't keep the president's social schedule. It's not on my phone. It's not in my pocket. I don't even know. I can't comment on a dinner I know nothing about.
Yeah, I think that represents a real problem for this committee, because there is clearly a way around the State Department for foreign individuals of significant influence and wealth to be able to directly lobby the president of the United States.
But I don't think
your
that's
answer
fair.
is that you don't know this is happening.
Well, I don't know that there's a
That
dinner.
in and of itself is a
I don't know
problem.
that there's a dinner, and I don't know what the guest list is, but I can tell you I've run into the president of FIFA from the World Cup. He's here all the time. I see him. He's a private individual. It's not a government entity, and he's met with the president and is friendly with the president. He doesn't have to go through me to meet with the president. The president has relationships and friends and people he's known for a long time. Some of them are foreigners. That's not unusual.
Yeah,
but
these
you're
are
asking
people
me
he's
about a
known for
specific
long
dinner
time.
and
These are
implying
individuals
nefarious
who just
impact.
bought their
I
way
can't
into
comment
a
on a
meeting
on a
with the
dinner.
president. I think you should probably endeavor to get your hands on the list to make sure that there aren't individuals there who are perhaps contravening national security interests that the
Well, I don't
Department
think
of
that's, I don't
State
have any
is
concern about that.
prioritizing.
Ultimately, I don't have any concern that the president having dinner with someone is going to contravene the national security of the United States.
This exchange is a brutal takedown of the administration's blatant disregard for ethical boundaries between the president's private business empire and public office. The speaker exposes the dangerous gray zone where foreign governments can essentially buy access to the U.S. president via investments in his family businesses. Trump is no longer just tweeting dog memes, he's marketing meme coins while foreign interests quietly move in. The denial from the secretary is laughable at best and negligent at worst. Either he truly doesn't know about the foreign influence dinner with the president, or he knows and is complicit. Either way, this is an open door to corruption with national security implications written in bold. And just when you think it couldn't get any worse, we move from meme coin dinners to NATO delays and Putin playing our president like a cheap fiddle.
We can't control what Congress does, and we've told the Russians this. Not now, 6-8 weeks ago. I believe, Senator Shaheen, you were involved in a conversation that made it clear to the Russians what would happen if there was no progress made. And that's been repeated multiple times. I would also make this point, and it's important. Every single sanction, Not one sanction's been lifted on the Russians. Every single sanction that was in place under the previous administration remains in place. So this idea we've given up leverage, well, we have the same leverage today that we had under the previous administration.
Well,
now,
Mr. Secretary, I would argue that the leverage that we've given up is taking NATO membership off the table, taking away a commitment to continue to help the Ukrainians with intelligence sharing and with military equipment and arms that they need to help fight this war.
Well, that continues. There was a pause for 1 week. All of that was restarted.
That was intelligence sharing, though, but it doesn't cover the equipment and arms.
Oh, absolutely. That program has not been rescinded. They continue to receive armaments from the United States.
And we continue to fund what the Ukrainians need as the president, and are you prepared to pass another supplemental bill to support them?
Well, that's a different decision. That's a different question. That's not up for me to decide. The White House would have to make a determination about whether to come to Congress for a supplemental. But everything that's been approved and congressionally appropriated is ongoing. In fact, to the extent that the Ukrainians have asked for anything additional, what they've asked for is air defenses, Patriot units, which frankly we don't have. But we are working closely with our NATO allies. There are NATO allies that do have some batteries of Patriot missiles that they could provide or transfer over to the Ukrainians to defend, for example, the airspace of Kyiv and other places. And we've been encouraging in that front and working alongside our partners there to get deliveries of some of these systems. As you can imagine, none of these countries want to give up their Patriot systems either. But we can't make them fast enough, and part of the challenge we have in Ukraine is that munitions are being expended substantially faster than the ability of the broader West, not just us, but the West, to produce them. Now, that said, on the issue of Ukraine, here's what we can all agree on. There is no military solution to this crisis.
Right.
It will have to end in a negotiated settlement. And the fundamental challenge we have in Ukraine is this. Russia wants what they do not currently have and are not entitled to, and Ukraine wants what they cannot regain militarily. And that's been the crux of the challenge.
I don't disagree with that at one level, but on the other hand, what Vladimir Putin is doing now is playing for time, and he's playing this president like a fiddle. And the longer he plays it, the more opportunity he has to gain territory in Ukraine, and the harder it's going to be to get him to the table. What we need to do is to put pressure on Vladimir Putin in every way we can to ensure that we can get them to the negotiating table.
Well, I disagree with this playing with a fiddle analogy, because the truth of the matter is when Vladimir Putin woke up this morning, he had the same set of sanctions on him that he's always had since the beginning of this conflict, and Ukraine was still getting armaments and shipments from us and from our allies, and the European Union is about to impose additional sanctions, and the U.S. is looking for no Patriot batteries to be able to transfer from other NATO nations into Ukrainian hands. And what the president's trying to do is end a war. He's trying to end a bloody, costly war that neither side can win, and people are dying every single day. But this notion that, what has Putin gained throughout this? He hasn't gotten a single concession. He hasn't gotten a single sanction lifted.
And the more time he gets without additional pressure on Russia, the more incentive he's got to continue to gain territory and continue to play for time.
The administration's excuse parade continues. We're told that nothing has changed on Russia sanctions. But sanctions without teeth are just press releases. The truth is, Trump is undermining NATO unity, halting arms to Ukraine, and handing Putin exactly what he wants. Time. Time to grind down Ukrainian defenses. Time to fracture Western resolve. And time to outlast a White House too scared to act. The Secretary's responses are bureaucratic platitudes that ignore geopolitical urgency. If this is what supporting Ukraine looks like, it's no wonder Putin hasn't blinked. We're not playing chess here. We're handing over the board, one concession at a time, while the administration hides behind semantics. From Eastern Europe to the Middle East, the foreign policy farce expands. Now, Syria's on the table, and the U.S. is cozying up to war criminals in the name of opportunity.
Thank you and the President for suspending or lifting the sanctions on Syria. I think the next step, and I think you agree with us, that both Syria and Lebanon are opportunities for us. And we need to explore the opportunities with a careful eye on what's going on to make sure it stays on track. I think the next step, as far as I'm concerned, as far as moving Syria forward, is getting personnel on the ground there. And you and I talked about the possibility of opening the embassy. And I understand that this isn't a classified setting, but can you maybe describe for us the challenges of opening the embassy, why we haven't done it to this point, staying within the bounds of the
Yeah, well, it's entirely driven by security concerns. By the way, it's not the transitional authorities. We don't think they would harm us, but there are other elements on the ground in Syria that we have to be able to protect our
important
people.
point.
And there are the ability, you don't just have to be able to get people in, you have to be able to get people out. We have all kinds of requirements that are there for a reason. If someone is hurt, do you have a medical evacuation plan? Can you secure a facility from an attack from an armed group, many of whom are still running loose in the country, unfortunately? It's one of the fundamental challenges the transitional authority is facing. On the broader point of Syria, I would say when Syria, if you look at the history of the region, when Syria is unstable, the region becomes unstable. And this has certainly been true after the Arab Spring led to the Assad rebellion against Assad, and that really destabilized the entire region. And then it turned Syria, frankly, into a playground for jihadist groups, including ISIS and others, that used it to operate and to destabilize their partners. So you have this change in December. In my view, which I've discussed with many of you individually, is the bad news is that the transitional authority figures, they didn't pass their background check with the FBI, okay? They've got a tough history and one that we understand. But on the flip side of it is, if we engage them, it may work out, it may not work out. If we did not engage them, it was guaranteed to not work out. In fact, it is our assessment that, frankly, the transitional authority, given the challenges they're facing, are maybe weeks, not many months, away from potential collapse and a full-scale civil war of epic proportions, basically the country splitting up. The good news is that there is a Syrian national identity. It is one of the places in the Middle East where Alawis and Druze and Christians and Sunni and Shia have lived and Kurds have lived alongside each other underneath the banner of a Syrian identity until it was broken by a butcher, Assad, who pitted them against each other. So they face a number of challenges. The first is they are dealing with deep internal distrust in that country because Assad deliberately pitted these groups against each other. He claimed to be the protector of the Alawis and the Christians and pitted them against the Druze or whoever else he wanted to, and the result is a deep level of distrust. The second is the displacement, upwards of 6, 7, 8 million Syrians living abroad. Very successful, by the way, in the countries they go to. But we need to figure out how we can enable the transitional authority to create an environment where they come back home, where they can come back to their homes, where they can help rebuild their economy. But what prompted the president to move quickly on sanctions? Because we had a plan. We engaged with the foreign minister at the UN here in New York. We gave him a visa to come into the country. We allowed their finance minister to come to World Bank meetings here in Washington, D.C. The next step was I was going to meet with the foreign minister, and some of you may have met with him already at Munich, but I was going to meet with him in Turkey at the NATO gathering. But the president had an opportunity to meet with al-Shara, and frankly, he made a bold decision. I'll do it. I'll meet with them under the Saudis and the Turks that encourage that. And the rationale and the reason is we need to, right now, the most important thing is that partnering nations, the nations in the region want to get aid in, want to start helping them, and they can't because they're afraid of our sanctions. So they don't. The lifting of the sanctions, its most immediate impact will be to allow neighboring countries to begin to assist the transitional authority to build governance mechanisms that allow them to actually establish a government, unify the armed forces under one banner and the like. But I want to be frank, that won't be enough. With the Caesar Act, we can issue waivers, but these waivers, because of expirations on them, are not going to attract the kind of foreign investment. Ultimately, there's going to have to be something done congressionally or more comprehensively to ensure that if the right steps are taken, we can create an environment for private sector growth that begins to provide economic opportunity to the people of Syria. But one last point I would make is the outcome in Syria will have a deep impact on what happens inside of Lebanon, because Lebanon, too, has been hurt by a combination of clashes at the border, but also they've had to assume responsibility for some of these Syrian refugees.
We believe that, by the way.
So the combination, if you think about a region, let's say 2 years from now, where Syria and Lebanon are stable, that opens up incredible opportunities around the region for all kinds of peace and security and the end of conflicts and wars. Obviously, this is a big task. It's big picture thinking, but it's a historic opportunity and one that we are obligated to try to explore and see if we can make it work.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I think we're in full agreement with this, and it is a conundrum as far as the sanctions are concerned. We've got the 6 months, but as you say, the future it's hard to predict the future since it hasn't happened yet, as Yogi Berra used to say. And there are real issues and risks in the future.
You know you're in deep when lifting sanctions on Syria, a nation ruled by a butcher, is framed as historic opportunity. Let's not get it twisted. Assad didn't just destabilize a region. He turned Syria into a mass grave of civil liberties. And now, in the name of economic growth, we're legitimizing transitional leaders who didn't even pass background checks? This isn't diplomacy, it's desperation wrapped in naivety. The administration admits the risk of civil war and distrust, yet spins this as progress? Spoiler alert, you don't stabilize a nation by shaking hands with ghosts of tyranny. This isn't nation building, it's reputation bleaching for geopolitical criminals. Finally, we loop back to foreign aid. But instead of accountability, what we get is a glorified PR pitch about bureaucracy with no mention of the real elephant in the room: transparency.
Just to go back on foreign aid for a moment, we're going to be doing foreign aid. We're going to be doing humanitarian relief, disaster relief. We're going to be doing all the things we've done before, maybe not some of the same projects, but we're going to be doing all of it. The difference is it's going to be coordinated out of the umbrella of the State Department, and it's going to be part of a cohesive, coherent foreign policy. And it's going to be driven by our embassies and our regional bureaus. So in the case of the Philippines, which was brought up a moment ago, we're going to rely not just on the region, the bureau here in Washington, but in our embassy on the ground to help us every single year construct what aid needs to be delivered, be it humanitarian or disaster relief or the like, to that country. And that's been missing, that sort of cohesive approach to how we treat foreign aid as a tool in our broader toolbox, as opposed to its own toolbox altogether. We want to make it part of our broader toolbox on foreign policy.
Yeah, and I think my only footnote is, as we do that, let's keep in mind that many people are willing to participate and be part of this without a drag on the U.S. tax dollar that I think can complement the vision that you just laid.
So now foreign aid becomes a cohesive tool under State Department control. Sounds great on paper until you remember the administration is actively shuttering USAID and manipulating the data on aid impact. The Secretary wants us to believe that local embassies will magically align everything perfectly. But here's the truth. Foreign aid is being reshaped not to help people, but to help this administration save face. It's more about branding than rebuilding. And when only 12% of aid reaches grassroots groups directly, cohesive policy starts to sound like code for contract cronyism. This is not reform. It's repackaged redirection of resources, likely toward allies and interests that align with Trump. Let's call this hearing what it is: a red alert warning flare. We're watching in real time as foreign policy, national security, and presidential conduct are swallowed by personal gain, blind loyalty, and ignorance parading as plausible deniability. The Secretary's repeated "I don't knows" are not a defense, they're an indictment. This isn't about party politics. This is about a president using his office like a storefront, and our foreign policy like a private auction. From meme coins to Middle East dinners, sanctioned guests to Syria sanction lifting, this isn't leadership, it's lootership. And the damage won't be just reputational. It's institutional, structural, and deeply corrosive. Trump Inc. isn't just alive, it's metastasizing. And unless Congress, the media, and the public put their foot down, we're on a one-way flight aboard Qatar's gift jet to democratic decay. Wake up. This isn't politics as usual. This is state capture in slow motion. If you believe in democracy over dynasty, truth over theatrics, subscribe now to Malcolm Varon Hearing. Share this breakdown and demand transparency before it's sold off to the highest bidder.